You were never supposed to hear this. Not you. Not anyone still breathing. And yet here you are, because something brought you here, didn't it? A whisper you couldn't trace, a feeling you couldn't shake, a door you weren't meant to open, and now that you have, you'll never walk away the same, because once this gets inside you, it stays. Not in your thoughts, not in your memories, deeper. It waits behind your eyes, in the silence, when everything else is still. In the winter of 1855, a letter appeared in Richmond, wax-sealed, unsigned, uninvited. Nothing on the outside except a single phrase written in black ink that never faded. They are not dead, only rearranged. That letter never made it to its reader because within 48 hours, everyone tied to its delivery had vanished. Some were declared insane. Some were found floating face down. Others were never found at all. The trail led to a farmhouse hidden beneath the trees of Henrico County. A house the records said was abandoned, but the locals knew better. They spoke carefully, as if something might still be listening. They remembered the black curtains, the wagons at midnight, the eyes in the window that didn't blink, and they remembered the children who entered, but never left. The Sullivan name had already been removed from every registry, every deed, every ledger, scratched out by hands that knew too much and feared even more. But some things cannot be erased. History smells. And once you catch the scent, it leads you places, dark places. What they found under that house wasn't rot or ruin. It was structure, calculation. 47 children, held, conditioned, broken. But that was only the surface. What they built down there was a template, a machine, a ritual, a system, designed not just to hurt, but to alter, to erase the soul, and leave the shell. It was never meant to be discovered. But when the door was opened, what star hit back at them wasn't human. It was reflection of something vast, something coordinated, something already moving again, somewhere else. They didn't scream, not the way you'd expect. There were no cries for help, no wailing behind those walls, only whispers, whispers that crawled through the air like smoke, thick, unnatural, and cold. The first men to enter the basement were seasoned, hardened by years of blood and battle, but not one of them made it through the first hallway without trembling, because the deeper they stepped, the quieter the world became. No rats, no creaking, no wind, just silence, and a pressure behind the eyes, like something watching from behind the stone. They said the stairs didn't go down. They pulled you, as if the very architecture had weight, had memory, had intention. And when they reached the bottom, they saw the carvings. Not childish, not decorative, but precise, symmetrical, unfamiliar. Symbols etched into every beam, every corner, every support post, as if the entire structure was part of a design, a sigil, a machine. The children were found in 3 rows, bound, eyes open, but not awake. They didn't react to light or to voices. Only when one of the men muttered a phrase in Latin did a boy blink, and when asked his name, he whispered, "One word, Mother. Not Mama. Not Mama. Not Ma." Mother, they all said it, as if it was code, as if it was the only word they were allowed to keep. Their ages ranged from 6 to 16. Different skin, different eyes, different bloodlines, none biologically related. Some spoke broken German. Others, something no one could identify, and yet they responded the same, to the same name, to the same tone, to the same command. Their wrists showed no signs of fresh restraint, because they didn't try to escape. They were taught not to. They were trained, shaped, and when asked who had done this to them, they didn't point upstairs. They pointed to the walls, Because it wasn't just a room, it was a womb, the birth of a different kind of child, not born of blood, but of system, and somewhere above, i.e. them. In the quiet snow, the woman who built it all was already watching the next farmhouse, already choosing her next blueprint. Mysterious. Commanding. You're probably asking the wrong question. Not, how could this happen, but how did no one stop it? Because that's the secret, isn't it? They knew. They all knew. Not all the details, not the chains, not the language the children couldn't unlearn, but they knew something was wrong, and they looked away. It started in town, at the general store. Mrs. Henderson saw the same woman every 2 weeks, modest, soft-spoken, clean gloves, no eye contact, a wagon full of supplies, meant to feed maybe 20 mouths. But the Sullivan property only had 2 people on paper, Ezra and Constant. When Mrs. Henderson asked, Constant gave the same answer. They were orphans, poor children from back home, just passing through temporary, until they found proper homes, and in an age where death visited most families, where orphanhood was a shadow on every doorstep, it made sense. But then came the doctor, Marcus Whitfield. He remembered the house well because he was never allowed past the kitchen. They called for him often, always urgent, always quiet. But he never saw a patient, not once. She told him the children were frightened, damaged, afraid of strange men. So she'd describe the symptoms, and he'd prescribe the cure. She always had the cash, always exact change. He didn't ask questions. Neither did Reverend Matthews. He spoke of them from the pulpit as if they were saints, saviors to the lost. He never asked to see the children. He only prayed for them. And when Constance said she was arranging for them to be sent to relatives, he believed her. So did the mailman, the farm hands, the neighbors, because that's how real evil survives, not by hiding, but by weaving itself into routine, into politeness, into trust. No one suspected, because no one wanted to. It's easier to believe in kindness than in structure, and what Constant built was structured. It wasn't a secret. It was a system, polite, funded unto. Ahead, until the storm came, until the cold broke the ground, and something started seeping back up, something they buried, not because it was dead, but because it was too alive. February of 1855. Was colder than anyone remembered. The rivers froze, the soil turned to stone, and in the hills of Henrico, something began to rot. The town smelled it before they saw it, not the smell of death, but of something sour, something disturbed. A traveler passing through Millbrook stopped at the general store. He asked if there was a butcher nearby because he'd passed a stretch of road near the Sullivan property, and said he saw buzzards circling the trees, but there were no farms out there anymore. No animals, no livestock, just the old farmhouse. Everyone pretended wasn't there. That same week, a boy from the next county went missing. James Coker, age 11. His mother said he went out looking for firewood and never returned. 3 days later, his boot was found near the frozen creek, 4 miles from the Sullivan land. The search party was small because it always was back then, but it grew larger when they found the second boot, and larger again when they found something else. Half buried in the ice was a set of wooden steps leading nowhere, no structure, no shed, just steps, as if a building had been lifted clean off or something below had forced them up. The men followed the path with lanterns and came upon a locked door built into the ground. The wood was fresh, the iron hinges polished, and next to the door was a small plaque hammered into the earth. It said nothing, just a single symbol, 3 rings interlocked. One of the men, a soldier, said it looked Roman. Another, a preacher's son, said it looked older. When they forced the door open, what they found was not a cellar. It was not a shelter. It was a room lined with wood, inscribed from floor to ceiling, but no crosses, no names, only instructions, geometries, phrases in languages no one could read. And at the center, a table set for 12, with chairs that had never been sat in, covered in dust. Except for one, the chair at the head, still warm, still waiting. There are places in this world where sound changes, where your own breath comes back wrong, where walls feel too close, even when they're far away. That room beneath the Sullivan land was one of those places, not a basement, not a shelter, a descent, 12 steps down. But they didn't feel like steps. They felt like surrender. The men lit their lanterns, but the light didn't stretch. It hung in the air, like it didn't want to touch anything. There were no windows, no fresh air, and yet something moved. Not wind, not rats, but motion, as if the room itself was breathing. The first room was small, but it opened into a corridor, 20 feet long, lined with doors, each door made of thick pine, carved with symbols, more of those rings, more of those phrases. One man tried to open the first door, but it wouldn't budge. The second unlocked. Inside was a bed, made from rope and straw, a single blanket, gray, fraying, and on the walls, scratches. Some looked like tally marks, others looked like names, but most were eyes, dozens of them, all different sizes, all staring back from floor to ceiling. One of the men dropped his lantern and it didn't break. It landed on something soft. They looked down and saw a child's shoe perfectly placed, as if it had been waiting there for someone to find it. They opened another door, then another, each room the same, but slightly different. Some with shoes, some with drawings, some with bones, but none with voices. It was as if the children had been there, had lived there but weren't allowed to leave any sound behind. Only shapes, only silence. The last door was already open, and what they found inside didn't speak. It stared, eyes black, mouth closed, still breathing, still human, barely, but it didn't ask for help. It whispered one word, not in English, not in German, but they understood it anyway, stay. They didn't run. They should have. Every instinct, every lesson passed down from men who buried their fathers and fought their demons told them to turn back, but they stayed. Because something deeper than fear had taken hold. Curiosity is a weapon, and in that place, it cuts both ways. The child they found was maybe 10, maybe older, hard to tell, skin pale, hair matted, eyes too focused, too knowing. They asked questions. Where are the others? Who did this? Are you hurt? But the boy didn't answer. He just raised his hand, pointed to the wall, and drew 3 circles in the air, then closed his fist and smiled. Not with joy, but recognition, as if he'd been waiting for them, not just in that room, but in time itself. One of the men, a teacher before the war, tried to reach out, tried to lift him up, but the child recoiled, not with fear, but with discipline. He returned to the corner, sat cross-legged, and hummed, low, steady, perfectly pitched. The sound didn't echo, it absorbed, and with it, the walls began to change. Not visibly, not at first, but the air grew thicker, like the room had been sealed. From history itself, then came the voices. Not from the child, not from the hall, from behind the walls, layered, whispered, all speaking at once, repeating the same word, mother, mother, mother. One of the men, a former chaplain, dropped to his knees and began to pray. But the words twisted in his mouth came out wrong, backwards, as if something else was speaking through him. The others pulled him up, dragged him from the room. The boy never moved, never stopped humming, just watched. With that smile that never blinked. They sealed the door behind them, and for a moment thought they had escaped. But when they returned to the stairs, the lanterns dimmed, and the walls had shifted, slightly, just enough to let them know the place was alive, not haunted, constructed, designed, to respond to them, to anyone who dared descend too deep. They called her Mother, not in reverence, not in love, but in fear. The name was scratched on the floorboards, etched into cellar beams, written backward, in soot, in blood, in ash. Mother, no first name, no surname, just the title, as if that was all she ever needed. One of the investigators, a man who'd studied folklore, said it reminded him of old mountain legends, stories whispered in cabins, told to scare children into silence. The hollow matron, the weeping seamstress, the first wife of the forest. But none of those names matched the weight of what they saw in that house. Because Mother wasn't a ghost, she wasn't a witch, or a demon. She was something older, more methodical. And she didn't haunt the house, she ruled it. Every board, every door, every breath beneath the ground moved when she willed it. And the children, they weren't captives, not in the way the world would understand. They were offerings, instructed, broken, rebuilt, to serve her. One of the journals, recovered from the upper floor, written in a trembling hand, described a ritual, not with candles, not with incantations, but with silence. The children were made to kneel, circle etched beneath them, salt lines broken by hair and fingernails. They were told not to speak, not for a minute, not for a day, but for a year. If they succeeded, they were blessed, marked. If they failed, they disappeared. No burial, no mourning, just silence, as if they had never been. One journal page, stained with tears, simply read, "Her eyes are behind the walls. Even when they sleep, she watches through us." That night, the investigators didn't sleep. They took turns keeping watch. But no matter who stayed awake, they each reported the same dream. A woman, standing at the foot of the stairs, hair like a shroud, eyes like embers, and a voice that came from everywhere, "Welcome home." Sleep was supposed to be safe, a retreat, a line of defense. But in that house, sleep became a surrender. Each man dreamt alone, yet each dream bled into the others seamlessly, like a play being performed across different stages with one single writer. They didn't just see her, they remembered her, as if they'd known her all their lives, forgotten, then forced to recall. All at once, in one dream, the chaplain walked through a cathedral. Empty, rotting, stained glass shattered, pews overturned. At the altar, she stood, hands folded, face hidden beneath a veil that shimmered like oil in water. She didn't speak. She hummed, the same tone the child had used, low, steady, paralyzing. And when he knelt, not by choice, but by something older, older than instinct, he felt something press against his chest, not a hand, not a blade, a memory, but not his, a flood of images, a girl in a white shift, hands bound, a ring of children surrounding her, mouths stitched closed, bleeding silently. They watched as the woman, Mother, lowered her hand, and the girl was gone. Not lifted, not pulled, gone. Another man dreamt of a library, endless, dust-filled, books with no titles, pages filled with the same word, over and over, return, return, return. And in the distance, a door opened. Behind it, laughter, not joyous, not cruel, knowing, as if something had read him, learned him, and decided he was ready. When he woke, his hands were covered in ink, and in the corner of the room, a page lay torn from an unseen book. It simply read, "You are not the first to find me, but you will be the last." The dreams didn't stop, they intensified. each one more real, more violent, more personal, until they couldn't trust each other's voices. Because sometimes, in the middle of a sentence, one of them would say something that wasn't their own thought, a phrase from the journal, a line from the dream, and behind their eyes, you could see it. Something else was looking back, not from outside, from inside, and it wasn't done yet. They marked the seventh night in silence. No one spoke it aloud, but they knew the house had crossed a threshold. Time no longer obeyed them. They'd light candles at dusk, only to find them half-melted minutes later. The sun would rise, then vanish, then rise again, twice in a row, before settling into an eternal twilight. One man tried to leave. He stepped through the front door and found himself in the basement, not once, but 3 times. The third time, he came back screaming, not from fear, but from something else. Recognition. He kept repeating a phrase over and over until his voice bled. It's not the house that's changing, it's us. The staircase no longer led to the attic, but to a room none of them had entered before. A nursery, untouched by time. Dolls without eyes, cradles gently rocking. No wind, no presence, but something had recently moved. In the crib, a note, written in a language none of them recognized, except one, the oldest among them, the quiet one. He stepped forward, eyes wide, as if some long-dead part of him had been awakened, and he began to read, fluently, flawlessly, a lullaby. But the moment he finished, he collapsed. Not from exhaustion, but from release. He wept like a man who had been searching for something his whole life, only to realize it had been hidden in his own mouth. That night, they all dreamt of the same thing, the town, but not as it had been, before the Sullivan family vanished, before the church was burned, before the cemetery was sealed. They saw the townsfolk lining the street, silent, watching something being pulled through the square, a wagon covered in black cloth, moving slowly, and behind it, 12 children, eyes covered, hands bound. One child looked up and smiled, not at them, at you, through the dream, through the screen, through whatever thin veil still separates your world from theirs. This is no longer about memory. This is about return. And it has already begun. On the 10th night, the basement door opened by itself, not with violence, not with noise, just a soft creak, as if something beneath had finally decided they were ready. The air that spilled out was colder than before, but it wasn't the kind of cold that comes with winter. It was ancestral, deep, like breath that hadn't touched lungs in centuries. They descended slowly, one by one, lanterns trembling in their grip, as if the flame itself feared where it was going. The steps down didn't feel like steps, more like descent into memory, into myth. The deeper they went, the more they remembered. Not things they had lived, but things someone else had. One man stopped and whispered a name. Not his own. Another began to hum. A lullaby he didn't know he knew. They were becoming, not possessed, not overtaken, but rewritten. The basement was not just stone and soil, it was a manuscript, a gospel of suffering, and they were being inscribed into its pages. At the bottom, they found what should never have been found, a second house, built beneath the first, brick for brick, mirror for mirror, except everything was reversed. Left was right, up was down, and every room held a version of what existed above, but darker, distorted. A child's room filled with teeth, a kitchen where the table was set for no one, a parlor where the portraits moved when you weren't looking. At the heart of it all, a chamber, circular, bound in chains, and filled with jars. Each jar held something pulsing, beating, hearts. 47 of them, not dead, not alive, just waiting. One man approached, drawn by instinct, or design, and as he touched the nearest jar, it pulsed in rhythm with his own chest. For a moment, everything fell silent. Then a whisper. One of them is missing. They turned to run, but the stairs were gone, and above them the house had sealed itself shut. This wasn't a haunting, it was a harvest. Before the Sullivan children vanished, before the basement was built, before the church bells rang for the last time in Cedar Ridge, there was a woman. Not much is written about her, because those who tried didn't live long enough to finish the page, but her name appears in the margins of forgotten town records, in the sermons that were never delivered, in the dreams of those who spent too much time near the ridge. Her name was Ellery Voss. She arrived in Cedar Ridge in 1819. No family, no belongings, just a satchel, and a silence that felt like it had weight. She was hired as a midwife, but births slowed after she arrived, then stopped completely. Instead, women went missing, not all at once, but in patterns. Every 7 moons one would vanish, no signs of struggle, no cries in the night, just an empty bed and a door left slightly ajar, the townsfolk suspected. But they said nothing, because Ellery Voss had a way of looking at you that made you forget. What you were about to say, she lived on the outskirts, near the ridge itself, in a cottage that never showed signs of age, no rot, no wear, no decay, as if time didn't dare touch it. And the children, they were seen near her property, walking in circles, speaking in tongues. Some were missing for days, then returned. Quiet, strange, eyes wide, mouths sealed shut. When asked where they'd been, they simply pointed to the forest, then to the sky, then to their own chest, like something had been placed inside. By 1832, the town decided to act. A meeting was called, men with torches, women with prayers, children locked inside. They marched to the ridge, but when they arrived, the cottage was gone. Not burned, not destroyed, gone, as if it had never been. All that remained was a circle of scorched earth and a single word carved into the center. Begin. From that moment, the town began to forget who she was, what she had done, why the forest no longer allowed by its song. And when the Sullivan house was built 3 years later, it was built directly on top of the circle because nothing buries the past, quite like pretending it never happened. The men who built the Sullivan house were not locals. They came from across state lines, paid in coin, but offered no contract, no ledger, no return address. They worked fast, too fast. The foundation was poured overnight, the walls rose before dawn, and when asked where they slept, they pointed to the cellar, but there was no cellar yet, at least not one anyone could see. When the mayor asked why the rush, why the secrecy, they smiled, like men who'd seen something that unmade their names. One of them, a man with eyes too pale for his skin, said something strange before leaving. He said, "We didn't build it for them. We built it for what's already below." And then he vanished. Never collected his wage, never stepped back into town. The cellar, when finally opened, was colder than any natural air should be. Even in winter, the walls were damp, but not with water. Something thicker, darker, clung to the stone, and the chains, the ones bolted into the walls, were rusted, but not aged, as if they'd been used recently, repeatedly, purposefully. There were markings, too, under layers of paint, etched deep into the support beams. Symbols, some mirrored, some inverted, none known to any faith. One looked like a spiral, made of bones. Another, a crooked eye, with no pupil. The children who wandered near the cellar complained of headaches, nosebleeds. One said he saw faces in the stone. Another heard his dead sister humming from beneath the floor. Still, the town said nothing. They needed the Sullivans to succeed, to appear wholesome, to prove that the land wasn't cursed, so they sealed the deeper rooms, boarded up the strange symbols, hung a cross on the entrance, and told the children never to go down there. But children are drawn to secrets, especially the ones that hum in the dark and promise that nothing can hurt them if they just come closer. When they finally pulled back the second layer of floorboards, they found soil. That wasn't soil. It looked like earth, felt like damp sand, but when one man dug into it with his bare hand, it bled. Not much, just a thin trickle of red, like the land itself had veins. They kept digging anyway, because by then, curiosity was stronger than fear, and what they uncovered didn't belong to this century or the one before it. First, a set of stairs carved directly into the earth, descending at a slant, too narrow for comfort. Then old wooden beams marking the edge of a chamber hidden beneath the official cellar, one that was never listed on any blueprint or deed. Inside, they found the remnants of clothing, torn, child-sized small shoes, still laced but brittle from time, and walls covered in scratches. Not symbols this time, not language, just desperate marks, fingernails, claws, or both. The ceiling was lower than it should have been, as if it was designed to keep people crouched, bent, submissive. In the far corner, there was a pipe. It led upward, but wasn't for water. It was an old ventilation shaft, narrow, rust-lined, barely enough for a scream to travel through, but just enough. If you were quiet, they put their ear to it and heard humming, not mechanical, not natural, but a child's voice. Humming something circular, a tune that had no beginning and no end. When one man tried to crawl through the shaft, he was pulled back, not by hands, by the air itself, as if the house had lungs, and had decided he wasn't allowed out. They started sealing the chamber immediately, but not to protect themselves, to keep others from going down. The dirt was replaced, the boards nailed shut, a rug thrown over it all. But no one forgot, because every now and then, when the house was quiet, you could still hear it. That endless tune, rising through the vents, looking for ears to catch it. Behind the house, past the crooked fence, there was a stretch of earth that locals never spoke of. It wasn't marked on any map. It didn't show up in records, but it was there, a clearing, where grass refused to grow, just cracked soil and shallow dips in the ground, like something heavy had once been buried, then unearthed. When they walked into it, the air changed, cooler, heavier, full of silence that didn't feel natural. They brought ground-penetrating radar, expecting to find tree roots or stone. Instead, they found dozens of cavities, neat, oval-shaped, stacked in symmetrical patterns like a layout designed for something sacred or profane. They called in the state archivist. He brought old burial ledgers, some dated back to 1799, but there were no names, just numbers, and a column labeled memory status. Most of them were marked, reassigned. Some were marked, denied, and a few, just a dash. Like even the record keepers were afraid to say it aloud. They exhumed one of the sites, only one. The coffin inside was made of dark wood, unfamiliar, tough as stone. It took 3 hours to pry open. Inside, there was no body, just a mask, smooth, bone white with no eyes. Where the face should have been was a spiral carved in reverse. At the bottom of the coffin, they found a note, written in charcoal, on a scrap of cloth. It read, "They are not dead. They are only beneath us, listening." The team didn't sleep that night. Some reported hearing footsteps on their porch. Others found the grave layout, somehow etched onto the back of their mirrors, in perfect lines. No one dared open another coffin. They filled the site in, marked it inconclusive, and told the town to stay clear. But it didn't matter, because every man on that team, within 3 months, either vanished or lost his mind, and all of their names were erased from the state archives one by one. The journal was found sealed, wrapped in waxed cloth, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Under the collapsed parlor, it was untouched by rot, pages dry, ink vivid, as if it had been written yesterday. But the first page was dated March 3rd, 1855. not from a resident, not from a Sullivan, but from a traveler named Ellis Penrose, a man with no record of birth, no known family, no origin story. His first line, "I heard it call to me from 3 states away." He wrote in steady, controlled handwriting, every entry meticulous, as if he wasn't just documenting, but obeying. He claimed to have seen the house, in dreams, long before he ever knew the Sullivan name. He described the door, the cellar, the altar, before any of them had been rediscovered, but more disturbing was how he referred to the house, not as it, but as her. She waits, not for the curious, but for the broken, the hollow, the ones who can be filled again. He spoke of rituals that predated Christianity, of symbols that didn't match any language. He claimed the house was older than the town, older than the land it sat on. He wrote, "The foundation is not stone, it is memory, layered, compacted, buried under false years." The deeper he stayed, the more he changed. He stopped writing in English, switched to a glyphic code no one's been able to decipher. Then, in his final entry, he switched back. One sentence, scrawled violently, tearing the page beneath it. She doesn't want escape. She wants to be remembered by blood. What they didn't tell the press, what no report ever showed, is that the journal ended with 32 blank pages. But under UV light, they weren't blank. They were covered in faint symbols that matched the spiral carvings found under the house, and when laid out in order, the pages formed a map, not of the house but of the mind, a chart of how to unbind memory. And behind the final page was a small patch of hair, braided, burned at the tips, not Penrose's, too long, too black, too freshly cut. Before the Sullivans, before the farmhouse, before the name Cedar Ridge was ever spoken aloud, the land was owned by a congregation, a church with no denomination, no cross, no steeple, just a stone structure, built into the earth, hidden by trees, swallowed by time. Local maps from the 1700s mark it as Sanctuary, 12. No location details, no roads leading in, only a red sigil, burned into the corner of the parchment, a single spiral, with a jagged tear through its center. The town historian, Margaret Dorsey, found it in a box labeled Condemned Records. Handwritten beneath it, in smudged charcoal, were the words, "Wards broken, clergy lost." She traced the name, Sanctuary 12. Through court archives, land disputes, private letters from early settlers, and what she found wasn't ownership. It was custody. The church didn't build the structure, they were assigned to it, by a council that no longer exists, a religious order that has no surviving records, no lineage, no successors, but they left behind rituals and warnings. One document, buried in Latin, described the land as Memoria Domus, the House of Memory, a location not meant for habitation but for containment. Of what was never directly stated, only hinted at through phrases like, "She who binds the forgetting," and "The hollow altar must remain sealed." The Sullivan deed, dated 1834, was signed by a man named Father J. Morrow. No church, no address, no witnesses, just a final annotation, in blood-colored ink. The binding is weak, but the offering has been made. That same year, the Sullivans moved in, and every resident of Cedar Ridge was told the church had been struck by lightning and collapsed. No ruins were ever found, no remains of the clergy, just ash and silence. And under the ash, a carved stone, half buried, with 7 names scratched out and 1 name remaining, still visible beneath the soot, Sullivan. Reverend Amos Granger wasn't a man easily shaken. He'd served in wars, held dying men in his arms, watched plagues sweep through towns, and buried more souls than he could remember. But when he stood before the Sullivan house in the summer of 1855, he said it felt like standing at the edge of a deep swallowing grave. He had come on request, after a letter arrived in his parish mailbox. No return address, no salutation, just a torn page. Reading. It remembers now, it opens again, and the children dream of her hands. The handwriting was that of a child, uneven, etched in pressure. He rode alone to Cedar Ridge, refused company, said some places shouldn't be witnessed by more than one pair of eyes. Locals say he walked around the Sullivan house 7 times, murmuring scripture, sprinkling water from a flask, marking doorways with ash. But when he reached the basement entrance, he paused, then took off his shoes and descended barefoot. That was the last time anyone saw Amos Granger the way they remembered him, because hours later he re-emerged, walking slowly, covered in dirt, eyes wide open, but blank. He didn't speak for 3 days, not a word. He just sat on the edge of the town well, staring into it, as if waiting for something, or listening. Then, at sunrise, he finally spoke. But the words weren't his. His mouth moved, but what came out was a voice not his own. It was high, cold, and wrong, and it whispered, "He who walks between the walls now wears the robe of forgetting." Then he began writing, pages and pages, symbols, not letters, spirals, knots, eyes without pupils, hands with too many fingers. They burned the pages. He smiled and said only once more, "The altar breathes again." He vanished the next morning, clothes folded, shoes placed neatly. Beside the well, and carved into the stone rim, was a single word, return. There are places that forget to forget, but Cedar Ridge wasn't one of them. They tried, they truly did, tried to pave over the memory, with silence, with fences, with polite laughter at supper tables, and sermons that never spoke her name. But memory isn't just thought, it's hunger, and Cedar Ridge was starving. It began in the wells. Water turned black for 3 days, not with mud, but with something thicker that didn't reflect light. Then the children started drawing symbols on the floors of the schoolhouse, not from books, not from home. Spirals, twisted grids, and one, a shape with 13 teeth that bled ink even when drawn in chalk. A midwife claimed her baby was born already whispering, with teeth too small and too many. The baker's son went blind in one eye and swore he could still see, but only down into the basement of the house no one dared visit. By winter, the town council held a secret vote to salt the ground, to burn the house and everything beneath it. But on the night they came with torches, the flames refused to rise. The wood, wet with fog, didn't burn, and in the silence that followed, they heard it. From beneath the boards, from the basement no longer sealed, laughter, not loud, but endless. And behind that laughter, the sound of footsteps, small, bare, running in circles, a child's game played far too long. The mayor collapsed on the spot, foaming at the mouth, clutching his ears. He survived, but never spoke again. And when he died, his final breath came with a whisper. "She's learning our names." The town tried again, tried to bury it all in silence and concrete and prayer. But some truths refuse the dirt. They bloom in the dark, feeding off the rot of secrets, and Cedar Ridge had planted a forest. They thought the forest was theirs, that they could carve homes into it, name it, fence it, split it into plots and taxes and deeds. But the forest never belonged to them. It was never asleep, just watching, listening, counting. And when they tried to bury the past, it bloomed instead, in the trees. It began with the roots, digging upward, not down, twisting into shapes that mirrored the symbols children once scratched on schoolhouse floors. Hunters said they heard chanting, no voices, just the wind through the leaves. But the words were clear. Old words, older than any preacher in Cedar Ridge ever dared speak. Words that made dogs whimper and birds vanish from the sky. Then the trees started moving, not growing, moving. Whole lines of oaks shifted overnight, rearranged themselves into perfect circles. 7, then 9, then 13. Inside each, a patch of grass that never grew, dirt too cold to touch. And if you stepped into one, you wouldn't hear the birds anymore, wouldn't feel the wind or time. A boy named Abram vanished in one of them. 3 days later, he walked out of the woods, not aged, not scared, but wrong. His eyes were clouded, and when he spoke, his voice came out in a whisper, not his, but hers, the girl they buried in the basement. She's listening through the bark. He said, she's peeling the sky. He said he wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, just sat by the window and whispered to the trees, until one night his bed was empty, the window wide open, and all the leaves on the tree outside turned black. Every single one. No wind that night, but the branches pointed east, toward the house they burned, but never truly destroyed. The forest had begun to answer back, not with fire, but with memory and hunger. The cellar had been sealed for 70 years, concrete poured thick, iron bracing at every edge, crosses carved into stone, salt packed into the cracks, but rot finds a way, and so does obsession. He was a stranger to Cedar Ridge. Dr. Matthew Gray, folklorist, historian, spoke like a man with no nightmares. He came with questions and refused the answers people gave. Locals called him arrogant, but behind closed doors, they whispered that maybe he had been called. He asked about the girl, the one buried alive, asked why no one knew her name, why every written record was smudged, burnt, or missing entirely. And when they wouldn't speak, he went to the forest. He camped by the ruins for 6 nights, took soil samples, photographed the trees, laid out old ritual diagrams, and waited. On the 7th night, the wind stopped, not slowed, stopped, and the ground beneath his tent cracked. When the sun rose, the entrance to the cellar had returned, not uncovered, not dug, returned, no marks in the earth, no disturbance, just a trapdoor of old wood with 13 nails across the top, each one rusted, bent, and humming, yes, humming. Gray touched it and bled. He said it was just a scratch, but the blood kept coming and the door creaked open on its own. Inside, darkness so thick his flashlight couldn't cut it. He stepped inside anyway. 1 step, 2, 13 in total, and then he vanished. Not a sound, not a scream, just the door, swinging slowly shut. A week passed, no sign of him, but on the 8th day, his voice came through the vent, in the center of town. Just 3 words. It's not a basement. And then, she's not buried. It started with the clocks. First, they slowed, then they reversed. Not just one, all of them. At once, in every house, every schoolroom, every church tower. Time turned backward in Cedar Ridge. Children began speaking in voices not their own, reciting names they shouldn't know, dates that didn't make sense, places no longer on any map. They said things like, "The vent is awake," and "She's watching through the drain." The mayor tried to calm people, but his wife disappeared the next morning. All they found was her wedding ring, placed perfectly on the center of their kitchen table, still warm. And the phone rang for hours after she vanished. No caller ID, just silence on the other end. Then, breathing, then, a faint voice whispering, "Open the second door." The sheriff locked down the town, but the locks didn't hold. Keys bent, deadbolts shattered inward, and the air started tasting like rust. The dogs stopped barking, then started howling. At noon, at dawn, at midnight, always in unison, always facing east, toward the house that burned, and the cellar that had no bottom. Witnesses say the church bell rang 13 times, though the rope was cut in 1972, and the man who cut it was found that same night, kneeling in the graveyard, eyes sewn shut, mouth full of ash. He had carved something into the dirt before he died, not words, a map to the basement, but not the old one, a new one, beneath the school, where the children kept whispering. There's another stairway now. There's another stairway now, over and over, until their eyes rolled back and their fingernails bled from scratching the floor. Parents pulled them away, but the children kept pointing toward the boiler room, where it was always cold, even in summer, and the janitor hadn't been seen in 9 days. No blueprint ever showed it, no records, no permits, no mention of a second basement beneath the school. But the children knew. They drew it, again and again, on napkins, on homework, on their bedroom walls, a spiral descending below the boiler room, deeper than the foundation, colder than the ground. The principal ignored it, until her daughter woke up screaming, said she saw her mother. But her eyes were wrong. Too many, blinking all at once. She screamed. "She's under the stairs," and refused to sleep again. So the town sent men to dig. They found stone, not brick, not concrete. Stone, laid by hand, carved with a language no one recognized. Symbols that twisted the longer you stared. One of the workers went blind. Said he saw something move. In the rock, another refused to go back down. Said there were breathing sounds, behind the walls, and children's voices mimicking his own. They broke through after 3 days. The air came rushing out, smelled like mold, and something else, salt and copper. They lowered a camera. The footage lasted only 13 seconds, but what it showed, the walls were pulsing like flesh. The floor was not flat. It curved inward, like a mouth, and in the center, a figure kneeling, covered in ash, holding something in its hands. A ledger. They retrieved it. It was warm. Its pages weren't paper, but something rougher, thinner, like dried skin. Names were written in a deep red ink, but the ink bled when touched, like it was still alive. And the last entry? A date that hadn't happened yet, July 31st, 2 days away. Beside it, 12 names, 10 of them belonged to children still living in town. The other 2 were the mayor and the sheriff. The lights went out at 3:06 a.m. that night. The emergency generator failed. All clocks stopped again, this time not in reverse, but frozen. And the voices returned, all across town, through walls, through drains, through mirrors, whispering one word: return. It began with static, on baby monitors, on police radios, on the old shortwave left behind in the church attic, just static. At first, then, the syllables formed, soft, wet, wrong. They didn't speak in sentences, but names, dates, places. The voices came from places they were never found, but where things were taken, from the mirror in the Sullivan hallway, from the drain under the school sink, from the crack behind the town clock face. A child's voice said, "I'm still here." Then a long pause, then, "You never looked deep enough." It came from the back of a thrift store TV, unplugged, wrapped in plastic, stored for auction. Another came from a torn teddy bear at the dump. Its voice box had no batteries. Still, it cried out, "Tell Mother I waited." Before the stitching burst, the most chilling came during Sunday service. As the organ struck its last note, every candle in the chapel went out. Then a whisper rose from every pew at once, 12 distinct voices, all children, all in unison. He walks among you again. They traced the signal, found nothing. But when they reviewed the recordings, the voices didn't match any known child from the town. Instead, they matched birth records from the 1800s, children who'd vanished in the first wave. From the first Sullivan generation, the names matched those in the skin-bound ledger, the red ink names, predated electricity, yet echoed perfectly in digital distortion. One officer tried to trace the waveform. It looped, spelled something. Not in English, but in glyphs found carved in the second basement. The waveform, when visualized, was a spiral, just like the children's drawings. One local man, a retired priest, collapsed while listening, said it was a summoning pattern, a ritual tone, designed to pull memory from bone. No one understood what he meant, until the gravestones began to weep, salt and copper. It started quietly, like a name slipping your mind, like walking into a room and forgetting why, one by one, the town's elders began to lose memories, but not all, only certain ones. Memories of the children, the ones from the Sullivan house, the ones who used to sit in class, laugh at recess, come home muddy and bruised. They remembered the town fairs, but not the missing pie contests, because those were for the children. They remembered school plays, but not who played the parts, because those were the children. They remembered screams, late at night, but not who screamed or why. It wasn't dementia, it was precision, surgical, targeted. A woman named Ellen Dunford, a librarian for 42 years, had once cataloged every town birth since 1790. Now she swore there had only ever been one Sullivan child. Ever. She said the others were just stories, whispers, superstitions. But her journals told another story, and on the inside cover, scrawled in something darker than ink, was a phrase she couldn't explain. They were removed from the river of thought. No one knew what that meant, until Father Morrow returned. He had been missing for weeks, last seen screaming near the old root cellar. When he was found, he was barefoot, covered in ash, and humming an old lullaby. Only the Sullivan children were known to sing. When questioned, he didn't recognize his own handwriting. On the church logs, he had removed the records himself, the baptisms, the funerals, the photographs, all burned, all lost, he said. I was told to forget, so I did, but something else remembered. Then, silence. The town began to change, not physically, but atmospherically. A pressure, a stillness, as if Cedar Ridge itself was trying to suppress a memory it no longer had, but still feared. No one spoke of the Sullivans anymore, because no one could. But when the wind hit just right, you could hear a name, a child's name, carried in the dust. The Cedar Ridge Historical Society had maintained ledgers, thick, heavy, bound in leather, older than the town itself, every page a record, every record a memory, until they weren't. One summer morning, archivist Henry Lowell opened a volume from 1835, the year after the Sullivan incident, but the ink was gone, not faded, not erased, gone, as if the thoughts themselves had been pulled from the page. In their place was something new. The margins were covered in strange symbols, drawn in a looping spiral that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. One phrase repeated over and over, like a whisper through time. They were never meant to be remembered. Henry showed it to the mayor, but when the mayor looked, there was nothing but blank parchment, The symbols didn't appear for everyone, only for those who still carried echoes of the original memory. And those echoes were fading. Fast. That same week, street signs began changing, subtly. Sullivan Avenue became Cedar Hollow. Then just Hollow. Then nothing. Children in school no longer learned about the fire or the trials or the locked cellar beneath the chapel because the textbooks had changed, their chapters rewritten, their authors untraceable, even the statue in the town square. A bronze memorial of a child holding a lantern vanished overnight. In its place, a smooth pedestal with no name, no plaque, only a carved eye, staring outward, unblinking. People began to feel it, even if they didn't know what it was, like the sound of a song you'd forgotten, still playing faintly in another room, like the scent of smoke, in a house with no fire. And then came the blackout. 3 nights with no power, no explanation. When the lights returned, so did the memories, but not as they were, twisted, incomplete, as if someone had reassembled the puzzle, but forced the wrong pieces to fit. People remembered children, but not their faces. They remember names, but not their voices. They remembered the Sullivan family, but not what they did, or why they mattered, until one child whispered something at recess, a single phrase that no one had taught her. They're still in the basement, but it's not the first one, it's the one beneath that. The Sullivan basement was already a scar on the town's memory. But beneath the stone foundation, they found another layer, one that was never meant to see the light again. It started with a tremor, a soft cracking sound, like ancient wood groaning under forgotten weight. Then the floor gave way, just slightly, just enough for someone to notice the air shift. Cold air. Not musty like a cellar, but sharp, dry, like the breath of something that hadn't exhaled in over 100 years. The workers called the mayor called the preservation team, and by dusk, they had cleared the basement floor, stone by stone, until they reached it. A hatch, metal, hexagonal, riveted shut with 7 locks, each a different shape, each one sealed with melted wax, and a different symbol carved above. One was a spiral, one was an eye, one was a key broken in half. One looked like a child's hand, but with 6 fingers, the final one was blank, smooth, as if no tool had ever touched it, yet it throbbed when you placed your hand near it, like a heartbeat buried in steel. They brought in equipment, cutting tools, light rigs, ground scanners. None of it worked. The lights would flicker, the scanners returned static, and the metal refused to heat. Then someone suggested something else. Not science, not force, a child's voice. One of the surviving journals had mentioned it, a passage barely legible, written in haste, with shaking hands. Only innocence may open the lock, but it will not remain innocent after. They brought in a recorder, played a lullaby, the kind no one sings anymore, soft, uneven, melancholic. And as the final note echoed into silence, the first lock turned. No one touched it. No one moved. It simply clicked and opened itself. Then the second followed, and the third, until all 7 fell away. Like pieces of a forgotten ritual, the hatch creaked open, and behind it, a staircase, descending not into earth, but into silence. Not darkness, but void. They lit a flare, dropped it in. It didn't hit bottom, it just fell, and fell, until the light was swallowed like a scream you never hear hit the air. His name was Elijah Moran, former military, now county inspector. A man known for his steadiness, his silence, his unflinching sense of order. He stared into that hatch for 5 full minutes, not speaking, not blinking, just breathing slow, like he was trying to hear something the rest couldn't. Then he asked for rope and a radio. No one argued. They lowered him down 100 feet, 200, until the rope ran out, but he kept asking for more. Voices above hesitated. They didn't like how the radio started crackling. Even though his voice came through clear, he said things like, It's wider down here than I expected. There's no floor, only steps. I hear bells, but I don't think they're for us. Then silence. For exactly 17 minutes, nothing. Just the sound of wind, where there should be none. Then the rope went taut. They pulled, slow, cautious, praying to a God they barely remembered how to fear. And Elijah came up, but not all of him. He didn't speak. His eyes, once dark brown, were now pale, almost translucent, as if staring through layers of reality the rest couldn't see. His skin, dry, flaking at the edges, smelled faintly of ash and salt and something else, something wrong. He held something in his hand, not a relic, not a weapon, not a book, a child's shoe, worn, but recent, modern, and inside it, a small roll of paper, folded 13 times, tied with a red thread. No one dared open it, but one of the workers, an older man, started to cry the moment he saw it. He kept whispering, "That's my granddaughter's shoe. But she's alive, she's upstairs, she's upstairs, she's upstairs." Elijah didn't react. He just stood there, staring up like something was still watching from below, and when they asked what he saw, he said only one thing. They left something open down there, and it doesn't like being watched. They sealed the hatch by sundown, bolted it, welded it, buried it beneath layers of steel and stone. But by then, it was too late. The noise had already started. Not loud, not screaming, not yet, just soft knocking from beneath their feet. Rhythmic, deliberate, like someone trapped in a coffin, tapping in Morse, a language no one taught, but everyone seemed to understand. And then the dreams came. Not nightmares, not images, visitation. Men who had never met each other, woke in sweat, describing the same woman, standing in the same corridor, wearing the same white dress, asking the same question. "Do you remember the number?" They didn't. Not then. But their noses bled for hours after. Women across the county reported sleepwalking, drawn toward the river. All of them murmuring the same phrase, "He's still hungry. He's still watching. We never fed him the 13th. One woman, a teacher, collapsed in her classroom, mouth wide, eyes rolled back, repeating a single word over and over. Sullivan. The town council called for silence. The mayor urged patriotic discretion. Local news stations were given a script. They followed it until the weather anchor vanished, mid-broadcast, leaving behind only his shoes and a trail of salt. Phones stopped working near the hatch site. Radios fizzled when pointed east. Children complained their shadows didn't match their movements anymore, and the birds, every single bird in the county, disappeared on the same night, all of them gone. But the strangest thing? Church bells rang at midnight. Even though no churches were open, even though some had burned down decades ago, people heard the chimes from inside their closets, from their bathroom drains, from the spaces behind the mirrors, each chime sharper than the last, until ears began to bleed. No one in Cedar Ridge slept that week, and those who tried woke up buried, in places they didn't remember falling asleep. That's when letters began to arrive one by one, left on doorsteps, written in the same ink, same handwriting, same phrase. You opened it. Now you remember. It was raining, not water, but dust. Black, powdery, smelling like burnt paper and old teeth. That's the night the last letter came. Folded once. No stamp, no name, no sender, just a single line, etched deep into the page, pressed so hard it nearly tore. Come home. He remembers you. It was found on the porch of the old Vance property, abandoned since 1861. when the last Vance child vanished during communion, locals say the house had been quiet. Until that week, then the lights began to flicker, even though the wires had long been torn out. Footsteps heard on the second floor, though no floorboards remained. A piano played itself at 3 a.m. Same song over and over, 12 notes. Then silence, then 12 again, and then the letter arrived. Sheriff Holbrook opened it first. He didn't speak, just turned, walked inside the house, and locked the door behind him. He hasn't been seen since. The second was left on Reverend Maddox's pulpit, placed in a sealed chapel no one had entered for decades. He tried to burn it, but the flames turned blue, and the ashes reformed into the same page, so he read it aloud. And the moment he did, every child in town stopped speaking. All at once, they stared at the floor, then slowly looked at the sky and whispered the same number. 13. The house, the letters, the children. All of it pointed back to the same event. The 13th child, the one who wasn't counted, wasn't documented, wasn't spoken of, but was. The one they fed to the thing in the basement. The one who returned. And now it waits. Not in the house, not in the woods, but in memory itself, crawling through the cracks between what you forgot and what you were told never existed. Every time you dream of a door with no handle, every time you hear knocking, but no one's there, every time your shadow stares back a second too long, that's him, the 13th, unspoken, unburied, remembered by something older than truth, and it only took a letter to bring him home. They said the basement was sealed, welded shut, bricked over, sanctified by 7 churches, condemned by 3 governments, erased from 4 maps, but it wasn't sealed enough because something came out, and something went in, and something stayed. The last of the Sullivan property, hidden beneath layers of forged deeds, buried under decades of fake ownership, lies not in Cedar Ridge but beneath it, directly beneath the center of town. The library, the post office, the school, all built on top of the original foundation, and deep beneath it, the final door. It's not made of wood or metal or stone. It's made of memory. Your memory, a shape you can't recall, but feel in your bones. The Sullivan family didn't build it. They were brought to it, dragged across counties, selected, conditioned, erased. Until they weren't a family anymore. They were a key 47 children, each with a mark behind the left ear, each taught the same silent language, each made to forget their name. And when the ritual began, when the chanting started, when the watchers arrived, they opened the basement and stepped down, but not to hide, not to run, not to escape, to become. The truth is, no one ever came out of that basement, not really. What crawled back up, what smiled for the newspapers, what stood trial wasn't Sullivan, wasn't human. It remembered every experiment, every doctrine, every failed attempt. It carried the voice of the original one, the first that was cast down, the one before names, and it whispered, "They will forget me until I remember them." Now you've heard it. Now, it knows you know. That's why your dreams are darker, why your house feels colder, why mirrors show just a little too much. You've been marked, not by ink, but by awareness. You've walked the spiral, listened to the voice, and now you must choose. Turn back, forget, pretend it was just a story, or descend. Remember and unlock what the Sullivan basement was built to contain. But know this, once the door opens, it never truly closes. You kept listening. That was your first mistake. They warned you. In the flicker of static, in the rustle behind your walls, in the pattern of the numbers you kept seeing, but you stayed. You listen to all 30 doors open, you let the voices in, you let them stitch themselves behind your eyes, and now they speak through you. The Sullivan basement is no longer under Virginia. It is under you. Every time you forget what you were just thinking, every time a shadow doesn't move like it should, every time you swear something's watching, but see nothing. That's it. Testing you. Waiting. You were never the audience. You were the ritual. Each section, each whisper, each silence between breaths was an offering. A key. Now you carry it. Look at your left hand. That twitch. That cold. That strange ache in the third finger. It means it's begun. Because the altar isn't stone. It's memory. And the sacrifice isn't blood. It's attention. You've already given it. Every second you spent listening, every image you saw in your mind, every unspoken question that burned behind your teeth, that was your vow. You can't undo it now, and when you try to sleep tonight, when your house creaks a little too long, when your phone lights up with no notification, when you hear breathing in a silent room, don't run. That's not fear. It's recognition, because you were never just watching a video, you were remembering. And what you've remembered was never meant for you to forget. So whisper it once, not aloud, not with your voice. Whisper it inside your mind, the name, the number, the silence, and you'll know that the door isn't in Cedar Ridge. It's inside you now, and it's open.